Might be quite helpful to describe a values-based curriculum as a values-shaped curriculum. So the curriculum that's set out in the national curriculum, in a sense, doesn't alter, but the way we look at the curriculum does, because our teaching and learning and understanding of that curriculum is shaped by principles of values, by which in this context we're meaning positive, universal human values. So concepts such as peace, responsibility, love, justice, and so on. And I think what happens is when we start to think through a framework that's created by those values, we begin to see the world through a values lens. And I think what that does is help to, well, just two things. I think it helps to give a personal, emotional connection to the world around us. And then likewise, we discover more about ourselves. But at the same time, I think it brings an objectivity to our thinking. So I think it enables us to, as it were, step outside of ourselves. So when we're thinking about a subject, an issue, a matter, and we regard it through, think of it in terms of, how is this bringing peace? What does this say about love? What are the lessons about responsibility here? It enables us to look, yes, objectively at something. And in doing that, it means that we can see with greater wisdom, I think. There's something about the mix of that personal connection and the ability to see beyond ourselves that comes in working this way.
Schools in England use a national curriculum as the basis for what they teach, and teachers within that national curriculum are usually focused on a subject. Either in a primary school, they look at the subject disciplines through the course of a week or a fortnight or a term. In a secondary school, teachers carry their subject discipline around with them and hope to leave some of it in every class they teach. But of course, as well as doing that, the basic curriculum, the teachers have the opportunity to transmit some beliefs, some opportunities, some ideas, some thoughts through that curriculum that they hope will make a difference to children's lives. It's not just the content and getting to the examination or the test. It's giving children a sense of the world through the way in which we approach that curriculum. So whether we're teaching PE or art or history, geography, mathematics or modern languages, we're trying to teach them fundamentals. Most people want children to be able to manage their own lives and care about the lives of others. Most people want children to be able to grow up to think they can make a difference to the world in which they live. And most of us want that to be a positive difference. So every teacher, when they're in a lesson, has to be delivering, if you like. It's often called delivering, have to be helping children to make progress in a national curriculum subject discipline. But at the same time, they're trying to encourage the children to make connections with the real world, see how whatever they're learning about has affected people in the past or people in different parts of the world, and how what they're learning about can make a difference to life in the future.
Well, what we did was simply start by having a value for each month. And it's so simple, so profound. But when you have a value like care, simple word, little word, and you start to unwrap it and look at what care means to me, look at what it means in terms of me and relationship with other people, what it means about my immediate environment, my country, what laws, rules, organisations are there in my country that are set up that actually help care. Moving out to around the world, you know, how do we care for the world? How do we care for one another, etc., etc. You can see, can't you, in that small example, that there is a wealth of possibility there, and simply by thinking and talking and therefore introducing children to an ethical language, an ethical way of thinking, it brings the value alive. So we find that we start speaking it, we think we're speaking about it, we ought to be enacting it. If we're enacting it and speaking about it and thinking about it, then we're able to think more profoundly. We're talking about the ability then eventually to be able to reason and debate and discuss, and to be able to assimilate paradox, because all of these values will offer a complex paradox as well. So it simply doing it, and there is, in a sense, there is no mystery to it, and yet it is the most magical and mystery-inducing process, because the more we think about it, the more we uncover places to go. So just starting in that way is a great start. Making it visual around the school is really helpful. Having notices, lovely displays, just, they speak to us, don't they? And then starting to think about how it can be really part and parcel, not only of assembly times and PSHE style lessons, but how it can really start to infiltrate the rest of the curriculum subjects.
I've got a marvelous example of where a teacher in a primary school, she went into a school, I won't name it, but it was a distress school. Relationships were poor, standard of teaching wasn't as good as it should be. It was dysfunctional. And this particular teacher had already been in a values-based school, and she decided that she would model what being a values-based teacher is about. So within her classroom, she modeled the values that she thought the school should be thinking about. This went on for several weeks, and at that school, they had lesson observation. And on one particular occasion, the head teacher came in to observe her lesson. And at the end of the lesson, he said, "I'm just stunned. I just don't know what to say. I'm not seeing anything in other classes like I'm seeing here. Your relationships with the children are outstanding. The children listen to you. There's not, behaviors that are detracting from their learning. What is it that you do?" And this teacher then explained what a values-based culture is, what you do in a values-based classroom, how you empower agency in the pupils from a values-based perspective. And it then transforms, so the children's behavior improves, their learning improves, and all the other things. Absolutely marvelous.
The values-based curriculum is there sort of spiraling through every subject to discipline it. it can be a separate entity, and you can do assemblies on values, or you can have a values week, but really the values-based approach goes through every single lesson. I mean, every lesson is built on values, and it'd be nicer if the lessons were built on good values, wouldn't it? And if we realised where we were going with values, so that with children we make them explicit. We typically in schools ask children to live by certain values. We set maybe behaviour policies, and if you've got a behaviour policy, implied in that is a set of values. So rather than going on about the behaviour policy and asking children to behave in certain ways for the good of the community, what we can do is make explicit through the way in which we bring our subject disciplines to children that we're living our values, that our values matter, and that we're exploring values in different contexts so that they can see why we've come to the values that we've got.
Well, we see enormous potency where schools are wholehearted in their approach to values-based education. And of course, with that come the obvious advantages of mutual engagement, mutual support, and the power that it becomes like a what's the phrase? Rolling out of its own centre. It takes on its own potency. That said, though, one of the key pillars of a values-based approach is the fact that we need to practice what we preach. We teach one another, we learn from one another by modelling. So actually anybody, anywhere, at any time, just doing it, just living it, being it, is going to have an effect. And what we found in so many examples across the country, across the world, is that this is so fantastically transportable. So anybody, anywhere, at any time can do it. So yes, if you are engaged by it, if you're thrilled, curious, excited, just interested, start doing it, see what happens, and it will surprise you.
But teachers who really enjoy their subject discipline communicate that to children. Children know that there's something absolutely fascinating about this subject. And typically the teachers who really enjoy their subject discipline may be well qualified. They may got A-levels and degrees and all sorts of recognisable qualifications, but the reality is that they just love their subject because it opens their eyes, it makes them realise, it gives them access to things that really do change lives, and children pick that up enormously quickly. And that's why children are fascinated by the way their teachers have accessed the subject when they're in their classrooms. So values-based teaching is there in the way that the best teachers take things forward. And the joy of working with other teachers is that you share ideas, share communication, share approaches to teaching that open up the already brilliant teacher into new possibilities and new ideas.
Number one is to have a look at your curriculum as it is. Say you're the art teacher, look at your policy and then underline, highlight all that currently talks about values. And you may be surprised. You may be surprised that quite a lot of your policy focuses on values. But on the other hand, you might think, oh my gosh, we haven't put anything in our policy that links with values. So that's one practical thing which I think could improve your practice in a school.
So when we teach subject disciplines, what we're really trying to do is to help children understand the way the world has unfolded over time. So if we're teaching science, for example, at the root of what we're teaching is the way that the human spirit has always tried to explore and discover new phenomena. And when we've done that, made new inventions, we're really proud and pleased as a human race. But actually then we realize there are side effects and downsides of what we've done. So history, for example, always explores the way in which people have tried to get on together in this complicated world. But now and again, we have these awful wars, and then we have to work out how to solve those challenges and seek peace, however transient it is, we do that. PE, for example, we give children the opportunity to learn to be good at skills in PE, and sometimes that means playing a team game against another team. And what we want children to do is compete and really try to win, but actually they need to win with grace and lose with dignity. And the values that we have in playing sport come through in the way we treat the subject as well as in the way we teach it. In mathematics, we'd want our children, wouldn't we, to delight in the way the ancient Greek mathematicians were able to toy with ideas and gradually reach theories and theorems that have carried us forward for thousands of years now, with a little modification, as now and again we find new phenomena and new slants on what we thought was truth. And what we realize is that our world is trying to uncover truth and hold to truth, but actually it's transient, it moves, it shifts, it just has different permutations as we go forward. So when the teacher of history has sort of led children's understanding of a famous battle or a terrible war, just to realize there's two sides to every story, that the people who won or lost see things differently. That lovely quote, and until the lions have their own historians, the tales of victory will always be written by the hunters, is so true, you know. How do we get children to realize that what we're reading is our version of events? And we need to have a little of humility and understanding in the way we treat it and the way we treat each other.
For me, what works is to think of my subject and look at what aspect I need to teach, and then see it through values. So, for example, in art, when I really faced the fact that I needed to do some 3D sculpture with my class of year 3 and 4, 1 month, I thought, how can I bring this alive with a values-based approach? And as soon as I had asked myself that question, it was easy to see the values potential. So in this particular example, we were looking at making 3D images, having been inspired by Giacomoto, looking at his little wire figures. And so instead of maybe just leaving it as an art lesson in 3D construction, looking at a famous artist and emulating his approach, we began to think about it, all of that, but how do we express values? How do people know how people are feeling, what responses they might be giving, what kind of people and values they might hold through how they, through their bodily gestures. And so when the children were then tasked with making a little model to show a certain value and explain why they wanted to show that particular value, was then the lesson, I think, but elevates to something that has a far greater connection, far greater purpose, but nicely incorporates all the skills that we wanted to start out with. And then, of course, we could delight in one another's products and have a look and guess the value and that sort of thing. So, so for me, just starting off with what have we got to do, and then right now, how can we deepen it using a values base? That's the way that works for me. And of course, once you start thinking that way, you start seeing that way, and it becomes a more natural process. Also, of course, the children become learners who learn in this way. So it isn't just the teacher who has to impart values. Children who are used to living and learning in this way become very sensitized to this particular way of thinking, and will see values for themselves, and will be demonstrating that they are values shaped thinkers. All the thinking and discussion and philosophizing has seeped into them as learners. And so when they read a book, when they're struggling with a maths problem, when they are looking at elements of sporting activities, they're seeing it through a values-based way. And just to prove a point, today our assembly in school was led by 2 children from year 6 who'd come up to me a few weeks ago and said, could they make an assembly PowerPoint about values in sports? And they showed me what they'd done. I said yes, of course, because who wouldn't say yes to someone offering to do your assembly? But it was ideal because they'd identified the myriad range of values that permeate through sports: resilience, determination, fairness, unity, etc., etc. And they'd found some really great examples, famous people who exemplified the values or didn't, and had really examined a range of sports through those lenses. So it's a dynamic process. I think it's quite interesting and perhaps quite helpful not to think that we don't always have to make explicit references to values in our subjects. Sometimes the values will spin out of the subject itself. And a great example of that can be with modern foreign languages, because the very act of speaking in a language other than our first or our own is, like Charlemagne said, it's like speaking in another language is to possess another soul. And I think we know what he means. You step right into the footsteps of another person you've never, ever met, and you can adopt another persona. And in doing so, you have an insight into the human condition, because what you're realizing in speaking another language is the connection, the similarity between us and the other. And once you do that, and once you become a tiny bit proficient in another language, you can't lose sight of the fact that people are one, we are one, that there isn't a disconnect between people of other countries, etc., etc. So really, the very act of speaking in another language is a values-based activity, teaching us empathy, teaching us understanding, and wondering and honouring about other people. That said, when we, for example, when we're teaching and learning about adjectives in another language, we're really strengthening the understanding that all people have common feelings, all people experience to greater or lesser degree similar emotions at different times. So learning the words for emotions and feelings in one language underlines how we feel in our own language.
If we look at individual subject disciplines, we could look at something like history and say, well, how do we get children to appreciate and understand the values that are inherent in that? For example, something like migration, which is a hot topic of the moment. You know, why are people moving around the globe, not just in Europe, from Africa and Eastern Europe, but why are people moving across the South and North American continent in the way they are? And of course, people have always done it for four main reasons. First of all, they want a better life. When we studied the Titanic, we're actually looking at many people who were making that journey to seek a better life in North America from the one they thought they were experiencing in Britain. The people who went on the £10 POM visits to emigrate to Australia were wanting to go for a better life. And then, of course, there are people who are trying to escape from where they are, escaping persecution. So those who went on the Mayflower, those Pilgrim Fathers who made that original journey to set up the British colonies in North America, they were escapees from our society because they were being persecuted. The Jewish people that we often teach children about that have always needed to move because of persecution. And then, of course, there are those who were sent away, those people who were ejected from their country, the Ugandan Asians in the 60s, or people who found themselves sort of sent from their existence. You in the Bible, you've got the people who were ejected from, well, who found their way out of Egypt to escape. And then, of course, you come to the fourth reason, which is invasion. People move because they think it'll be better to go somewhere else. So the traditional teaching in England about the Vikings, the Romans who came to Britain to conquer us, really, but we sent them back, didn't we? Because we are very strong and we like that. But this notion of really exploring why people move and how it's still going on after thousands and thousands of years, that it's almost natural in the human spirit to up sticks and move sometimes, whereas other communities stay where they are. And the issue is not just to teach children about the Vikings came and they went away, but what was driving them to do that, and why did they want to do it? Why did people seek different, better circumstances for themselves and their community? And just really exploring the values within the concept of trying to teach children what we often see as the facts.